Talks series, where we're just launching this series today, just recognizing that finances are a huge part of all of our lives, right? I mean, I think when you start thinking about finances, it's like you all drove here, right? You all drove here, right? You had to pay for your car, and you're probably still paying for your car. Tomorrow morning, you're going to get up and go to work, right? I mean, for most of us, we don't do it just because we love it. I think I could say I probably do. But I mean, for many of us, it's like we go to work because we need the money. We want to get paid. We all have things in our pockets that we're paying, right, $40, $60, $80 a month for. Did you eat today? You're going to eat later, right? You probably went shop. You got to go shopping for your food. And I could go on and on and on and on. Like money is intricately involved in everything that we do in our society. And things are getting more expensive, and pay isn't going up with it, right? And so the statistic that we've used with this series is that there was a newspaper article where it said 73% of Americans would say that finances are their biggest concern in life. And so it's in recognition of that, we want to just spend a few weeks talking about finances. And we've called this thing the no shame zone because we want to do it in a way that's not heavy, this is really what we want. Truly, I love the way we kind of frame this, is that it's what we want for you. This is not what we want from you, right? So often too often we don't talk about finances at all. Hello? Too often as a church, we don't talk about finances. I think as pastors, you don't want to feel like, we don't want people thinking like, all we want is your money. So I think we almost shy away from it a little too much. But the reality is that when we step into faith in Jesus, we are called to give him all of our lives. This is meant to be a holistic thing. We don't just give him our Sundays. We're not just called to give him our religious part of our lives, our spiritual part of our lives. We're called to give him all of our lives. And frankly, I think we are giving a disservice if we don't talk about the full weight of Scripture. We don't talk about all the areas that Scripture talks about. And so talking about finances is just super, super important. It's important for the kids, by the way. So if there's young folks in the room, listen to this series. This isn't, you probably don't have the bills that we do as adults, but learn how do we view our finances? How do we handle our finances? What should our relationship with our finances be? It's going to be super important even for the young ones in the room. 3 promises I would make as we talk about this is that it's going to be a no shame zone. It's not meant to be a heavy-handed 4 weeks on finances and money. You need to do this. You have to do this. Things like that. It's really, as I said, it was what we want for you, not from you, which I think is a great way to frame the discussion. Because really, I think I skipped this, but God's way of doing things is never heavy. Right? There's reasons why God says to live our lives certain ways, handle our finances certain ways. Why? Because it actually brings freedom. And so when we view our finances, when we view our money, when we have a healthy perspective on it, a godly perspective on our finances, we have the opportunity to find God's blessing in our finances and His freedom in our finances. Think of all the ways spiritually that a relationship with the Lord, that the Holy Spirit has worked in your lives. What kind of things has He done in your life? Has He brought freedom to places of bondage? I believe that it's the same in our finances. If we do finances the right way, right? If we give them to the Lord, we trust Him, we have a proper view of finances, I believe that we are going to find freedom in that area as well. Amen? I really do. And this really is all birthed out. And here's the goal, first off. The goal is that from wherever you are, you're able to take steps forward in this area of handling your finances. One that's like a different trajectory that kind of gives you hope about your finances. And so maybe you're really struggling right now. We hope after this 4 weeks that you're going to be in a better position. Maybe your finances are, they're all right. I want to see them even better. Maybe you've got great finances. I want to see them even better. Wherever you are, I believe that there is a way forward. And I was going to say that this is really birthed out of this has been a conversation in the Vineyard USA for a couple of years now that they're really focusing on. And so my wife and I, we've mentioned it a couple of times, we're just kind of finishing up a program that they had, which was called the Financial Well-Being of Pastors Incentive. Vineyard recognized, I think they had put out a survey, they recognized that for pastors, their biggest concern in life was finances. Their church finances and their personal finances. And so they put together a program to help those two areas. So this has really been a topic that the Vineyard is trying to focus on. Because again, I think as we bring these things under the lordship of Jesus, of the Lord, I think we will find freedom in these areas. And so each week, we are going to focus on one of the teachings of Jesus rooted in a parable. So each week, we're going to use a different parable to frame our discussion. We're going to finish with some homework, not really homework, but just some practical questions and things like that you can follow up with. Next Saturday, we're going to have the financial seminar. This is part of it. If you haven't registered, register. That's going to be super practical. And then James and Amber Lee will actually preach next week's sermon, which we're super excited about. And so we'll be doing that. We want to make this practical, you know. And I showed that middle clip. I like that. Again, I like that show. It's always funny. But like, man, we all have a money story, don't we? That's kind of where we're starting, is like recognizing where we start in this journey of finances. Like we all have a money story. We all have a story about the way we grew up, the way like in my house, like we never talked about finances. I don't know what your kind of experience as kids growing up. I was an only child. My mom had a decent job. Like, you know, we weren't rich, but we never lacked for anything. And so we just never talked about finances. It wasn't like, you know, it just wasn't I got very little, I think, like education on how do you handle finances and things. It just wasn't a topic because it wasn't an issue. We weren't loaded, so it wasn't like, you know, we could just buy whatever, but we had what we needed. And so it wasn't a worry either. And so, but we all come at this thing from a different perspective. Your story is different than mine. And your story affects how you relate to your spouse with finances. Your money story relates to how you relate to God in your finances, right? If you know, you've maybe grown up where you just never had enough, and maybe you don't trust God with your finances, right? Oh my goodness, I've got to do this all myself because I've had to beg, borrow, and steal and work hard at this thing my whole life. Maybe you're doing really well, and you get, you know, it's like, hey man, things are great. I don't need to worry. You know, if God is here and my finances are over here, I'm fine. And so how we view our finances and our money story goes a long way into like how do we present our finances to the Lord? How do we live out our finances? So our money story is super, super important. That's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And so, again, as I said, each week we're going to kind of center our story, our teaching around a parable. Parables are great. Parables are, you know, I think parables are memorable because they're story, right? If I were to say, like, you know, sum up for me the Sermon on the Mount, yeah, you probably might be able to say there, I know the Beatitudes are in there and there's something else in there, but like, you know, unless you're a super duper like theologian, maybe you couldn't pick too many things out. But if I were to say, how about the story of the Good Samaritan? Like, boom, you could probably kind of summarize it pretty well, right? It's a story. We think in stories. So I think stories are so important. They're so memorable. Jesus' parables are wonderful too because they almost pull you in. They're usually to one audience, and he wants to make a point to them. And so the parables usually have a little bit of a twist to them. And so he'll start telling the story. The people it's geared towards will be like, yeah, yep. And then he's got this ending that kind of hooks them, that surprises them, that it expresses and exposes their hearts and announces something and teaches them something. And so these parables are such powerful teaching tools that Jesus used, and we would like to as well. What we're going to look at is probably the most famous of the parables. Luke chapter 15 has the parable of the prodigal son. That's what we're going to look at today as we look at this idea of a money story. I recognize, so it's a chapter 15, that really there's like 3 parables in there that are about lost things that are found. But I think if we look at this in context, we're going to see that there's a financial story going on here as well. It's kind of maybe a little bit underneath in the context, but that's important about how we view our finances and the Lord's role in them. And so I'm just going to break this out and just handle a couple of verses at a time as we go. Chapter 15, verses 1 through 3, we're going to look at first. And so if you've got a Bible, you can open it up. If you've got it on your phone, wherever you want, but they'll also be up here. There it is. And so it just says, so this is the context. Who's Jesus speaking this parable to? Verse 1, right? He says, now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to hear him. Verse 2, and the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. So he told them this parable. Boom, there's our context. And there's our, could you, as we see it, as we just read that, could you see the 2 different distinct groups that he's preaching to? Right, one of them are the tax collectors and the sinners, right? That's the first audience, tax collectors and sinners. We probably talked about this a lot, right? Tax collectors were hated. They were collecting taxes for Rome, and actually they were allowed to also collect the taxes for Rome, but also for Rome, but also collect a little bit more for themselves. And so they were working for the enemy. They were getting rich off the backs of their people, being super unjust. And so if we think of it financially, the tax collectors were probably pretty well off, right? They were doing all right. Financially, they were doing great on one level, but on the other level, there was probably, I don't know if there was, but like guilt and shame. The money that they got was actually not got with really nice means. They were really just robbing people. And so there's one that morally they fell short. On the outside, right, financially they look great, but morally these guys are falling short. Sinners, right, a collective term for those who are just not following God's law. Probably those who are not living great lives. In one sense, all Gentiles were called sinners, but I think this is a group of people who just were probably not living their lives great. Were probably those who would feel unwelcomed at church. Those who were morally corrupt, probably not doing things great. Those who would expect to feel shame and judged if they were actually to come to a religious figure or a religious person or to church. Are there people like that today? Right? Yeah, there's probably lots of people who would feel like, gosh, if I went to church, I would be judged and feel shamed. These are the people, actually, interestingly enough, these are the people that are gathering around Jesus. This is who Jesus hung out with, right? The tax collectors and the sinners. So one is tax collectors and sinners. The other is the religious establishment. It says there, the Pharisees and the scribes, the religious elite, those who are externally doing everything right. Maybe just going through the motions, but externally they're doing it. They're following the law. They look good. They're super religious. If you were a religious leader, you could probably feel pretty good about yourself compared to the tax collectors and sinners, right? You're probably looking at them with judgment, right? With like, who are these people? Why are they hanging around this Jesus? If Jesus was really a holy person, if he was really from God, he would not be accepting these people. So they're full of like pride. They're full of judgment. Outwardly, they're looking all right, but maybe not so much on the inside. And so the parable is written, this one, to two different audiences. And it says, I like that. In verse, In verse 1, now the tax collectors and sinners were drawing near to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. Oh, I wanted to go verse 1. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to Jesus. I think there's something with that all. It wasn't just a one-off. These are the type of folks that were attracted to Jesus, right? Many of these folks are coming to a religious leader who doesn't seem to condemn them or to shame them. They're drawn to Jesus because what they would expect from a religious person, condemnation and judgment, they're just not getting from Jesus. The issue for the religious folks was not that they were coming to Jesus. The issue for them was that Jesus was welcoming them, right? I get that's fine. They come to Jesus, but he's eating with them. And he's hanging out with them, and he seems to welcome them. That's the rub that they didn't like Jesus for. He eats with them, he welcomes them. Jesus is not leveraging shame or excluding them in any way, shape, or form. And so this is important, I think. The currency of Jesus' relationship with these folks was not condemnation. Again, if it was, they would not be hanging out with them. So that's kind of that's who this parable is written towards, these two different groups. And it starts off this way. And again, this is a parable that we probably for the most part you've all heard, you all know fairly well. We'll just go through it again. But so in verse 11, it starts the parable. And it says, and he said, Jesus, right, he's teaching this thing. There was a man, we're going to look at verses 11 through 13. There was a man who had two sons. Preaching to two different audiences. This man has two sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country where he squandered his property in reckless living. And so, again, contextually, what's going on? This is both audiences probably would have heard this the same. The religious folks and the non-religious folks who were hanging out with Jesus probably heard this the same way. Wow, that was disrespectful. Right? And so this younger son, in essence, he's not asking for his dad for his college savings early. He's not asking him for a couple of bucks. Basically, what he's asking for is his inheritance. Dad, I don't want to wait for you to die. I want it now. I want the money now, and I want what's going to come to me when you die. I want it now. Wish you were dead. Don't care. Just give me the money. I'm looking to go. So contextually, that would have been super offensive. And yet, what does the dad do? He gives him the money. It wouldn't have been easy. He would have had to liquidate all his assets. He would have had to sell sheep or land or whatever, right? But the dad gives him the money. The young man, he goes a little crazy. What does it say? He says, verse 3, it says, not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey to a far country where he squandered his property in reckless living. Later on, we learn from the older son, he goes, he wasted it with prostitutes. Like this guy was like a young guy with a credit card for the first time, and he went nuts, right? He goes, it's like he's going to take a trip to Vegas or to New Orleans or Amsterdam or something, right? He's going to go and he's going to party and just waste this money. He didn't take the money and invest it. It wasn't like he was going to go and buy, an apartment complex or some property, right? He just, without a view of the future, just wasted all this money. He just wasted it. And as I said, like both of these groups probably would relate to the story at this point. My gosh, how offensive, how horrible was it? Could you relate, by the way? I'm just thinking like, how many of us when we were young and, like we bought all the stuff that was, yes, Matt says, yes, I've lived it, right? Maybe it wasn't the partying stuff, but maybe it was like, I just made really bad financial decisions. I bought like a VCR that you didn't have to pay for until 2009. Like I screwed up, right? How many of us have that and are still maybe even living with that decision still? College tuition, maybe that's not quite the same, but like that hangs over you. That's not a mistake per se, but that's a hard one. But verse 14 through 16, as we keep going on, and so it says, verse 14, this is the younger son, and when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. And so just about the time that all his money ran out, like the economy just crashed, right? There's a famine, nothing's going on, this guy's got no money, he's broke. This is a guy, I think we recognize too, this younger son was a guy who grew up with like a silver spoon in his mouth. He had a dad who had money. He wasn't used to this stuff. And now we would probably call this rock bottom. He's hit rock bottom. Emotionally, you could picture maybe he's feeling like just stupid. Oh my goodness, how dumb have I been? I wasted this all. I had every opportunity to do something good with this money or just to stay at home with dad, and I just wrecked it. I feel so dumb. I'm in this situation of my own making. He couldn't blame anybody else. This was a situation of his own making. He feels dumb, I'm sure. He feels embarrassed. He probably feels ashamed. He's now having to make choices that he never thought he would have to work in a field feeding pigs. Like, how did I get here? Oh my gosh, what shame he probably felt. He feels alone. This happens too, right? As soon as the money runs out, all the party friends are gone, right? And so, all the folks that he was hanging out with probably ditched him. He's in a faraway country with no family. He's alone. This is, for him, rock bottom. The parable could have probably ended here, right? So if the parable ended here, what did he say? Jesus would probably be just saying, listen, be smart. You get what you deserve, right? Don't waste your money. Spend it right. Think about the future, because it's not going to go well for you if you don't. The parable could have ended there, but yet it doesn't. Remember, there's two audiences that he's going to speak to, and there's something for each of these guys that Jesus is trying to speak to. And so verses 17 through 18 then, it goes on to say, but when he came to him, when he wakes up, like, oh my gosh, where am I? The younger son says, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But here I am, I perish with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I'll say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. He doesn't expect to be welcomed back by the father. He doesn't expect to be welcomed back and brought into the family. He's just thinking, maybe my dad will hire me and maybe I can work off the debt that I accrued. Maybe eventually, he'll maybe he'll forgive me someday, but if I work hard enough and I stay at home long enough, and maybe there'll come a day where like Dad would, doesn't want to strangle me every time he sees me. And he pictures what the greeting is going to be like, and he starts rehearsing his speech. He's ready. He's rehearsing it. Okay, this is what I'm going to say when I get. Dad's probably going to say this, and this is what I can say. I do that all the time, by the way. You ever have to make like a tough phone call, and before you even pick up the phone, you go to call, and like, I'm thinking through. Okay, they're going to probably say this, and maybe I could say this. Like, it's anxiety. It's terrible. That's where this kid is at. That's what he's doing. And then verse 20. Verse 20 says, so he arose and came to his father. So he leaves this far-off country, heads back to his dad. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion on him and ran and embraced him and kissed him. Verse 21, and the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. So he begins his rehearsed speech, but he gets interrupted. And the father's response is the first plot twist here in the parable. Here's the first plot twist where Jesus is going to do something unexpected, announce something unexpected. So the father who was wronged by the foolish son has apparently actually been watching for him, hoping that his son would actually return home. And he's excited to see the son. He runs to him in compassion. We could talk about that, how outrageous that would have been for a father to hike up his skirt that they would have been wearing, their clothing, not a skirt, their clothing, and he would have run out to see him. That was even culturally crazy when he would run out to see his son. He doesn't rub his son's nose in it. He doesn't traffic in shame. He doesn't start his conversation like this with the son. It's not what he does, but he shows love for his son that is unconditional. Jesus' parable announces something. He announces a father who doesn't traffic in shame. He announces, but rather a father whose love is unconditional. You get the dad in the story is our heavenly Father, right? I mean, we get that, right? That's what Jesus is announcing. There is a Father in heaven who doesn't hold it against you, who is actually waiting for you to come back home, who is not going to make you feel guilty, who's not going to make you feel shamed. And this is true of all things in your life, even like your money story, right? So it's okay to bring our financial situation before the Lord if it's not good, because we're not going to be met with shame and guilt, and you should have done it differently, right? Every area of our lives, including our finances, we can bring them to the Lord because we have a Father who has unconditional love, a steadfast love that extends forever. And also, picture the son, by the way. He was working with the pigs. He was stinky. And yet his dad runs out to him and hugs him. And he wasn't cleaned up yet his dad runs out to welcome him. Verse 22, it goes on to say that, but the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and his shoes on his feet, and bring us the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Keep it on verse 24 here for a second. That was it. Don't miss, there's one word in here I think that would have really hit home to this younger son. The word son. Do you see that? My son. You are still my son and my daughter. I love you. Think about the impact it would have been for the boy to hear those words from his father. My son. Oh, it melts your heart to hear that. And it would have melted his, I'm sure. All the actions by the Father that we just read in those verses are about restoring his son through unconditional love. The celebration begins. And of course, Jesus could have ended the story here also. But remember that Jesus is speaking to two different audiences. One audience just heard an invitation, right? The tax collectors and sinners just heard an invitation. They heard a story that they could relate to. This is the reason why they were coming to Jesus, right? Why they were hanging out with him, right? Because of what happened in this story. They came to Jesus, and Jesus didn't start his conversations with them this way. He welcomed them into relationship. He welcomed them into this relationship that would change who they were and make it different for them. They came to Jesus because, like the Father, Jesus didn't deal in guilt and condemnation. When we turn to him, he doesn't wag his finger at us, but rather extends his unconditional love towards us. no matter the condition of our lives, no matter the condition of our finances. But there was one more audience. There's still a grumbling audience that says, what do you mean, Jesus, you're hanging out with these tax collectors and sinners? They haven't heard anything yet, right? For them. Verse 25 comes up now. Now the older son, there's another son here. The older son was in the field, and he came and drew near to the house, and he heard the music, and he heard the dancing, and he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed a fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound. We're going to do verse 20. I just want to make sure I get this. Verse 27. Has received him back safe and sound. Actually, I keep going. Let's go. But he answered his father. But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, begged him. But he answered his father. And here's where the finger comes out all of a sudden, right? The younger son to the father. Look at these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, right, comes back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. Culturally speaking, right, this older son's words to the father would have been disrespectful. Both of the audiences, the sinners and the tax collectors and the religious folks, would have seen that as super wrong. In a shame on our culture for the son to berate the dad like that and to say, how dare you do that, Dad? That would have been to both audiences just not okay. They both would have recognized that. So the actions are just as so the older son's actions were almost as disrespectful as the younger son's actions, maybe in a different way, but also being disrespectful to the dad. He is the one who introduces shame into the story. By the way, he criticizes his father and begrudges him his unconditional love for the younger son. The older brother feels like he has done everything right, and the younger brother has done everything wrong. His perspective is, I've earned it with my good choices. You owe me. He deserves what he got, right? And how dare you give him what you gave him? That's the older side. I followed all the rules. I deserve it. This guy's messed up. He deserves guilt and shame and condemnation, and yet you lavish him with all this stuff and welcome him in. And then verse 31 then. Listen to verse 31. And he said to him, this is the dad to the older son, son. He starts with son, even to the older son who was just disrespectful to him. Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this brother was dead and is alive. He is lost, and now he is found. Here's the next twist of the story, right? Jesus exposes the heart of the religious folks who are criticizing his unconditional love towards the tax collectors and sinners, his generosity to people who hadn't earned it. That's really what he's getting at with this older son. Those who had fallen short morally and spiritually and even financially, Jesus is welcoming them, and they didn't like it, the tax collectors, the religious folks, right? We can have this view as well, I think, right? I mean, if we're honest, we can fall into the judgment. We can fall into, we're following the rules. We can fall into, man, my finances are great. Look at these people. They've made a mess of their lives, right? Come on. We can fall into the same category. The father, though, interestingly enough, calls them both sons. There's an invitation to both of them, and neither of them got what they deserved. He welcomes the older son back into the party. Come on, everything I have is yours anyway. It's always been. Come on in. He is patient with both of them. He wants both of them to experience his gracious love towards them, and he wants them to extend that grace to the other. He says, this brother of yours. And so he wants them both to receive his grace and unconditional love. He's hoping that they would do the same for each other, that they would extend grace and love towards each other. It's right and just to celebrate. And so Jesus uses this parable to express the Father's love to both religious folks and irreligious folks. To people who have done it all right, people who have messed up and done it all wrong. It's a story for those who You've nailed your finances. You're doing really good. It's a story for people who have messed up, who have wasted things, who have maybe got money underhandedly or the wrong way. It's a story to everybody that we can come to the Father because there is unconditional love waiting there for us. The story invites us to find ourselves in this story as well, the parable. It forces us to surface our own emotions, maybe even around our money stories. Am I willing to bring my financial situation and story before the Lord? Because we could stay distant. My finances are a wreck, and it's my fault, and I've done it. How could I possibly ask God to bless this thing? Our money story might be, man, I'm doing really, really good, and so I've got it. And Lord, why would I need you? I've been following all the rules, and I'm going to keep doing it. Both brothers had a money story. One was shame, one was pride. One came back in desperation, one resisted because of self-reliance. If we're going to move forward in our financial lives, we need to recognize our own story, where we're coming from, where we're starting, where we're at right now, right? And wherever that is, bring it to the Lord. But just offer your finances to the Lord. Right? I've made a mess of them, Lord, or I've done pretty good on my own. But you know what? I want your way in my life. That's what I want. Because when we do, you're going to find that God shows you grace and love and mercy, just as he did to both of the brothers there. Now, I just want to poke a little bit at this money story issue for 2 seconds, and then we'll wrap up, because I'm going to give you a couple of questions now. And actually, you know what? The two friends, could you do me a favor? As I'm talking, there is a half sheet of piece of paper in the back. Not the one with the calendar, but there's one with some questions on them. That's your homework. Some more questions to look at. Maybe you just hand them out now as I'm finishing up. This way nobody forgets them. Don't worry about the calendar one, but there are other ones with a few questions. But so in terms of thinking about your money story, so this is the way the series is going to work. This week we're talking about our money story, right? Where are we coming from with our finances? So I want to encourage you, no matter whether they're good or bad, to bring it to the Lord. Next week, we're going to talk about where we're going, right? If we want things to get better, we have to recognize where we're starting and where we're going. So next week, we're going to talk a little bit about dreaming about our finances and where is God calling us to go with them. That's the first 2 weeks. And so let me ask you this then. So think back to your own childhood. Did you feel, you don't have to answer this as just rhetorical, but just maybe think about it like this. Did you feel like your family had more, less, or a similar amount of money compared to your friends? Like when you grew up, how do you feel about your finances with your parents, with your family of origin? You feel like more or less or just about the same? And how did that affect your childhood? This is what we're talking about with our money story. Reflect on, that's up here, perfect. Here's the next one, is reflect on messages you received about money from your parents or caregivers. What feelings, excitement, worry, shame, pressure surfaced during these experiences? Right? And so was there ever an issue with finances? Maybe did you go into bankruptcy? Were finances a stressful thing? How were your conversations with your parents? And the third one is just this, consider how your money story might be affecting your financial decisions and behaviors today. And whether we realize it or not, your money story probably affects the way you handle finances more than you know. Right? What areas might it be holding you back or propelling you forward? Right? How do you, and I think maybe some of those questions that are the take-home ones were and what does that mean to the way you talk about finances with your kids? Right? And so this is what I want you to think about this week. Your own financial story, where you've come from, how you were shaped and formed. And what I hope to do, and what I hope to kind of get across, at least with today's message, is no matter what that story looks like, the journey towards just seeing it different is to bring it to the Lord, right? Because just as God will heal different things in your lives, spiritually speaking, physically speaking, he can begin to heal our perspective on finances, and he can actually begin to give us freedom in our finances. But we've got to trust him with it. We've got to trust him with our lives. We've got to trust him with our finances as well.